This government was elected with a thumping majority. Yes, I know the first past the post system can produce unusual results, but that is what we have. And very much, they said, we're the party, we're the government on the side of working people, on the side of ordinary folk. That was what Labour was saying. So yesterday we had votes in the House of Commons on new renters' rights. Now, to be honest, this was not much more than a continuation of what the Conservative Party were doing anyway. But the idea is, you can't be told that you have to leave a rented property. The idea being that it's fairer on people that are renting, and it gives them protection in other ways against bad landlords, of which, of course, there are some. And the same principle goes, of course, for employers. Undoubtedly, there are some beastly employers out there, but most of them are decent people. But when you look at what was put in the House of Commons today, the right to claim against unfair dismissal from day one of being employed, well, that, of course, does give workers remarkable rights, but I pick out that. And there are many, many other things here. 0 hours contracts, well, actually, people on 0 hours would be able to gain guaranteed hours if they ask for it under this legislation. There's a whole raft of proposals here to improve the rights of employees. The whole thing, of course, is an absolute bonanza for the lawyers. The reactions to it, well, the trade unions would like it to have gone further, and the Federation of Small Businesses say, how on earth can we put up with all of these extra costs? But take the two together. Take renters' rights, take workers' rights, and let's work on the basis that the government genuinely and sincerely want to help people in those categories. My question is, does legislation like this actually improve the lives of ordinary people, or does it potentially make it more difficult? Because there isn't much point to employment rights if there aren't enough jobs out there. And certainly when it comes to renters' rights, I think what you're going to see are a significant number of private properties on the rental market withdrawn and prices going up even further. Give me your thoughts. Does this legislation improve the lives of ordinary folk? Farage at GBNews.com. Now, I am joined by Kwasi Kwarteng, former Conservative Member of Parliament and Chancellor, and Lloyd Russell-Moyle, former Labour MP. Lloyd, what do you make of, all these new deals and the setting up of a Fair Work agency? I mean, this was one of the big pictures in the election, wasn't it?
Yes, and I think it's about rebalancing rights, and the Labour Party would say it's about fairness, about making sure that when the balance has got askew, they will sort it out. And I think on renters' rights, there's a pretty clear consensus from the established parties, that this is something that needs to be done. I'm not sure I buy your argument that people will leave the market. I think small mom-and-pop renters might well do, but what we see is the rental market increasing in size, not decreasing in size, but the number of landlords decreasing. So what you're seeing is a landlord that has
big private equity.
Private equity. Yeah, actually, right. For most renters, and if you look in Europe and other places, private equity is quite a good landlord, because they aren't skimping and saving. They aren't coming in, your toilet's broken, and the landlord who just has one property says, oh, don't worry, I'll come round and fix it myself with my screwdriver. Private equity, they employ the people to do it and fix it. They've got the tradesmen that have 100 toilets in the back garage. They just install a new one and sort it out.
But the worry,
some
Lloyd,
of that, I think, is far...
But the worry is the rise in rentals is truly astonishing. Truly astonishing. We're looking at 20% to 25% rise on average in rental properties across England since 2021. We have an exploding population. We have a limited amount of housing stock. I actually genuinely, and you might be right, private equity might buy it all up, but I think all the advantages, buy-to-let was a big thing.
It was.
And the Conservative government kind of cracked down on it. You couldn't write off the cost of a mortgage in terms of tax allowances and all of that.
So the reason why Labour had to go back to the renters' rights was that when Gove introduced it in the last Parliament, we didn't have the votes, because a lot of Conservative MPs objected to a lot of the things that he was trying to do on the grounds that he was driving out, as we've discussed, private landlords. And we can all say, well, it's all very well for private equity to hoover it all up. But actually, for people who wanted to save a bit of money, who wanted a bit of a return on their savings, the one way that they could get a good return was by investing in maybe a couple of flats or one flat, just a very small portfolio, and rent out the properties. And that was, for many people, a form of pension. And I think it's a great shame, actually, if you're going to essentially drive out the private landlords and leave it to huge capitalists
I was down in Cornwall at the weekend, just for a couple of days, and very interesting, talking to people about how much quieter the summer had been in Cornwall, and how many for sale signs there were.
Sure.
And these were people who'd bought properties in Cornwall, and they were using Airbnb, etc., to rent out, and now they're saying it's getting harder and harder and harder, let alone the environmental performance certificates that they've all got to comply with by 2030. So certainly in terms of, and this is a different subject, but it's similar, in terms of short-term holiday availability, there's less of it.
That's right.
I've seen other reports from South Devon saying much the same thing. I just feel, Lloyd, this kicks
These
through.
are what?
I mean, it's interesting. You are describing something as if it is a negative thing, that we're seeing less short-term lets in people's homes. I see that as a positive thing.
You're essentially arguing in favour of big capitalists, private equity people with very deep pockets.
I think there has been
running the rental market.
There has been a big problem that we have treated houses like a surefire investment that give good returns but never have any risk. And the problem with that is it skews the rest of the investment market, because what happens is if everyone says, well, I never have a risk in this and I'm getting double-digit figure returns over...
They're not really. I mean, the returns are a lot more modest.
There are good times and bad times.
They were at points, and we haven't had a real recession in the housing market, kind of where it's actually reduced, the equity is reduced in house prices for probably about 15, 20 plus years
for a
long time. And actually, what I think we need to do is find financial mechanisms for people to invest in other secure ways.
Well, I get that.
And actually say that housing is not something that we expect to be billions.
So Lloyd, I tell you what, with immigration numbers running at the rate they are, you can see why investing in property has been a good thing.
Yeah,
that's right.
But per head of population, we have the same number of bedrooms in this country as we did in 1970 to 1975. It's not like we have some huge historic shortage. What we do have is people living very differently.
Of course, we live differently.
And so that does mean that we need to build and do all those things as well.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. But I want to stick on the legislation. I want to go back again to employment rights. For small businesses, and there are still about 5.5 million small businesses and sole traders in the country, they were really pretty angry with the last Conservative government. The IR35 rules on self-employment, the rises in corporation tax, many of those other things. The worry, Lloyd, is that if you're a small company and you're just about getting by and you take on staff and somebody could quite vexatiously go for unfair dismissal on day one. That's not good for small businesses. Is there not an argument with what Labour are doing? Is there not an argument for some kind of exemption or derogation for smaller businesses?
Well, we don't, in the rest of employment law, usually say this is for small business, this is for big businesses.
Because the employment law we've got all came from Europe. We're in charge of this now.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that's not the standard that we currently have. And a lot of these things, I think most businesses already comply with. Whilst we're talking about being able to claim for unfair dismissal from day one, we're also talking about having a probation period there where you can be fired without having to give a reason based on your company.
Unless the employee says, but they did something awful. I mean, it's confusing.
Well, so let's see what... Can I just say, look, as far as the parliamentary process is concerned, my understanding is that the bill has been published. So we haven't even had a second reading.
No.
So there'll be lots of consultation. And I strongly suspect that a lot of the provisions will be watered down, amended.
They will be amended
once they've listened to
make sure there's a right balance.
Absolutely right. But I think what Nigel's saying is broadly true. I think if you continue to put burdens on small business, and they're the engine of the economy, really. I mean, you say that there are 5 million small businesses, but they employ millions of people. And if you put regulation on them, you put tax on them, you're essentially going to strangle growth.
I worry
that's something that we should all be very concerned about.
For example, being able to apply for statutory sick pay, which small businesses can draw down from the government, from the first day of being sick, rather than having to wait
4 days,
actually will help small businesses.
But what
Because at the
about
moment,
maternity-
small businesses don't accept those sick people in, and they just have to cover that
totally get that. But what about the maternity leave? I mean, from day one. I mean, now you have to wait 6 months. Under the proposals that I've seen, you get maternity leave
Day
rights
one
from
rights.
day one.
Day one rights
And
for
I'm
maternity
afraid
leave.
in the real world, that's going to put people off. I mean,
for
it's
small employers. Look, there are some elements of this that make sense. I think the 0 hours compromise they've reached makes sense.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be on 0 hours, you can say to your employer, please give me regular rights.
you've had a certain amount of hours so far,
But equally, the trade unions wanted to ban 0 hours contracts completely when they do actually suit some people.
Yeah, of course.
So there are some things in here that I think are sensible. And I just fear, and Kwasi backs me up, I just fear that it's unfair. And I think we need to change the way we think. Well, Reagan, it's a long time ago, but Reagan had a different set of employment rules for firms with less than 20 employees, or fewer than 20 employees.
We should
and I wonder whether that's where we ought to be going.
So where the department, and I was obviously responsible for it for a brief time, the Treasury will object because they don't like cliff edges. The problem with those saying, OK, 20, what happens if you employ 21 or 22? And there's all of that. But I think broadly your approach has to be the right one, because we can't simply just burden smaller businesses with endless tax and regulation. We can't do that.
Well, on some of these things, maternity pay is a good example. Is there a role for the state to help contribute more for small business?
Yeah, but who's going to pay
which
for that?
does happen.
But what I mean
in
is,
Scandinavia, that does happen.
You might say, if you're a business, so rather than changing the rights of the individual, you say, if you're a small business under 20, the government, the taxman, will help contribute a greater amount to that maternity pay
I think
from
that's
day one,
something that should be
compared
looked at.
to if you're a big business. So I think that there are compromises that you can do at the back end for the size of business that don't
we'll have
derogate
to
from
see
the rights
how
of
the
the
thing
individual.
develops.
Well, Lloyd's
in the course
point
of the
leads us on
parliamentary
very nicely to the budget.
Okay.
I can't
I know
remember.
about that.
Do you know what? I can't remember a budget that's been more keenly anticipated, either in a good or a bad way, for many, many years. It is the talk of the town.
Sure.